two in particular, are related to directly to the setting up of monitoring and evaluation framework, or the strengthening of the existing one for your respective gender equality plans. And this webinar and the next are very much related to each other. So I think it will be important for you to get back to the content of each in relation to the other. The second one will be devoted to designing your impact pathway. Could have been the first, actually, but let's start from the indicators and let's put them in a broader framework, which we'll start to do already today, for better understanding why they are important and how they should actually look like. Actually, I will get back. The presentation will be structured in three stages. The first stage is getting back to into greater detail to some self-monitoring instruments we already shared with you during our recent online session, where we had presented the overall monitoring framework we were proposing for AGRIGEP. And to check what makes theoretically a good indicator, and also to have a clear picture of the typology of indicators, because they are not all the same, they do not serve the same purpose, they are not necessarily quantitative, and so on. The second stage of this presentation is to get a little bit the broader picture and understand that basically what makes a good indicator, it's the fact that it answers a question that you want to answer, so that it should be guided by evaluation questions, and that indicator should help you to answer those questions. So looking at those questions, what they could be, notably for GEP implementation or sustainability, that's important too, and that would be especially important to connect to the next webinar on impact pathways. And third, I would like to open the floor for a discussion around where you stand with your own GEPs with regard to setting up and informing through data collection indicators. And we will look at what is present, or at least what was present when you shared them in your GEP with regard to self-monitoring. So we will contrast what we will discuss first with what you currently have, and you can see what is missing. Okay, and maybe you can also update us about what has been completed or complemented since, perhaps. So let's get back first to those few hints about indicators that altogether, by the abundance of acronyms standing for a combination of properties making theoretically good indicators, tell us something important first, that can also light a little bit the guilt for not having fully developed monitoring systems yet in AGRIGEP. Setting up good indicators is obviously not an easy thing. It's not an easy thing because you will see that they need to cover a number of information and a number of stages in implementing your gender equality plans and strategies. And that in itself, it's pretty difficult. The other difficulty it entails is that it should rely upon data collection. And data collection systems are sometimes part of your GEP, I mean, to set up a proper one, but they are often lacking so far. And because they are lacking, you lack the institutionalized way to collect the data that would inform your indicators. So you are in difficulty in the first place to define them. And that's not applying only to AGRIGEP. That's something which is common to many projects devoted to gender equality in the academia. And another layer of difficulty, which is broader as well, and rather correspond to this notion of a broader evaluation framework for gender equality planning, is that we often miss in academia a self-monitoring culture. It's not only that we don't have the data or we don't collect them structurally, properly, regularly, and reliably, is that we are not so much into monitoring ourselves. Sometimes we monitor the others through research project or through other intervention, but we are more difficulty usually to look at ourselves and to the outcome and impact of what we are doing. So it's not an easy task, and that's why it's worth to get back to what we know about indicators, especially for this type of project. So let's remember that what we want with indicators is not just like to fill in columns in tables in Excel sheets or please the European Commission. What we want to get with those indicators is to know whether the work you're doing in implementing change is actually making a difference. Is the change happening at all? How the change is happening? What may prevent it from having happened yet? All that is behind this the notion of making a difference or not. So it's important to insist on that. What the overall purpose of this? What we also want with indicators is to describe change or events that have been triggered by the intervention. So ultimately, it's about whether there is a change, whether it makes a difference, whether you're not wasting your time and resources of the European Commission / your organization. But it's also about knowing and understanding what is actually going on in the institution through your intervention. Is there a direct relation between what you do and the change you observe? Is there like a potentially greater potential of change based on what you do than what is shown by the data you collect? All of that is important to understand what is going on. Of course, it's about providing evidence because you may have intuition or background information that change is happening. For instance, that your student community or staff are more aware about gender bias and more ready to engage with them. But you need some evidences of different kind to demonstrate it. And this requires to be clear on at least two things. First, what you want to measure. And that's the first question to ask yourself. And then, which evaluation question you intend to answer. Both are related, of course. So which evaluation you want, question you want to answer. So you need to define the question first, and then what you want to measure to help answering that question. So that it's a sort of precondition for indicators to be developed soundly. As you maybe remember from last time we engaged with this issue, there is a typology of indicators, and we will get back to this typology at the end of the in the third stage of our conversation today. Output indicators. Spoiler alert, you all have some to some point. I mean, those who have indicators in their GEPs, they have mostly output indicators because those are the easiest to filter out and the easiest to collect. So it's about monitoring whether you delivered your planned inputs, your planned outputs, sorry. So it's you need to produce certain type of tools or communication campaign or deliverables as part of the project. These are, whether you did it or not, these are output indicators typically. The participation to a capacity building session or a meeting as part of the upcoming monitoring on-site visit, for instance. These are also output indicators. So how many things have been done, how many people have been reached out, this is all about outputs. Outcomes that come second is measuring the medium impact of a project. So it's already about impact, but not like the ultimate overarching impact, but what is come in between outputs and actually making a long-term impact. So if you refer to capacity building, for instance, it's no longer about just informing how many people attended, but how many people actually get it, got the information that was shared, got the skills and adopted and implement the skills that they acquired during the capacity building session. So this is evidently a slightly more difficult to measure, and it is not measured at the same moment. It's not an exit questionnaire. It's something that we will measure after time has passed to check whether those people who attended the training are doing things differently as researchers, as human resource managers, as teaching advisors, as they would have done before the training, or as other people would do who did not attend the training. So there is already like much more information into it. Impact indicators are meant to measure the long-term impact of your intervention, here of your gender equality plan / the AGRIGEP project. This is something that we usually try to have in the GEP, even without a much informed discussion on indicators prior to that, by measuring the increased proportion of women, for instance, in decision-making, or their participation in externally funded projects as principal investigators, or the integration of the gender dimension in research content, and so on and so forth. These are impact. This is something that will come later on, ideally as a result of the combination of action that you have in your gender equality plans. And that's really, of course, important. But again, it's not the same timing to measure it. You need to have a bit of background. You need to collect a lot of data, and to often to set up the data collection system in the first place so that you can inform this type of indicators. And this is quite limited, how it is defined here in this definition, because actually impact indicators can well be qualitative. They can also document whether people are, in the long run, doing things differently, whether some practices have been institutionalized, like, for instance, gender bias self-checking, self-assessment, when making decisions about recruiting people. This is not measured by numbers. This is observed. For instance, process indicators, they do not come after the 3 first. They are actually in the middle. They should be in the middle. I had no time to change the table that I borrowed, so I should have done it, because I think it's not so telling in terms of process. So process indicators are really important. They are actually measuring how the activities and process triggered by your gender equality plan are unfolding. So it's, of course, more qualitative, but it can be also quantitative when it comes to intermediate step. There is a process between the action and the expected impact. It is looking to the process of the intermediate steps taken for the action to deliver the expected impact. And that's very important. You, for instance, you might appoint people in different departments to set up a gender mainstreaming network to support GEP implementation. So you will see how this process of appointing those people will progress. And this is, of course, a relevant indicator, because there is a pace. There might be also a pace that reflects difficulties in some areas. I don't know, maybe it would be more difficult to get your faculty of engineering on board versus a faculty of social sciences, just an intuition. So this, or an example, this might happen. This will tell you relevant things. Before I move to the next slide, do you have any question or any doubt about distinguishing? Is it clearer a bit for you to distinguish between these different type of indicators? And of course, in the back of your mind, you can start thinking, okay, do I have this in my GEP or not? Then I will tell you later, and we will discuss. Any question about that? No? Lut or Pan, you want to add something in terms of definition, or is that clear? Okay.
It's clear. I was just wondering by the few people that we see, because so many have their cameras switched off. Maybe it's better for you if you can see who you are talking
Yes,
to.
it will be nice indeed. I cannot put everyone on my screen, otherwise I don't see my presentation anymore. But yes, please. I don't know. I know that in the morning sometimes we don't want so much to be seen before third coffee, but I had mine, so okay. So let's move on. Well, another evident typology is, and that is also important to highlight and to discuss a bit, is a distinction between quantitative and qualitative indicators. Let's start maybe with a quantitative one. Why with a quantitative one? Because when you look at most GEPs, not only in AGRIGEP, what you see are quantitative indicators. Well, the first thing I would say is that be careful. Quantitative indicators can be a trap. First, because they might not be achieved. And then you might demobilize yourself or enter into a spiral of failure because you missed some of your intermediate quantitative indicators. So devising, again, what is the question you want to answer, why this is to be measured, and why it's better to measure it through numbers or proportions, percentage, than through other means, is a precondition for those quantitative indicators to be relevant. Maybe Lut or Pan will, or someone else will would like to discuss this, but my take is that my recommendation, based on experience, will be to have a relatively limited number of meaningful quantitative indicators and being extremely careful about the timeline you set up for them to be achieved. They should be, in general, more related to impact, except when they simply document outputs. You know, for outputs you can have, because you can have a target of how many people you want to train, how many people have actually participated in a training. That's quite objective, quite easy to collect. But still, you may have a question also about the expectation, where you put them versus the reality. So be careful already for output indicators. But think whether it's the right way to measure what you want to measure, and do not simply put quantitative indicators everywhere. This is what we tend to do, and this is what we tend to do because we don't consider the different typology and because we don't ask the evaluation question before. We get straight to this number because this is usually what we think ex ante to be actual indicators. That's not correct. Quantitative indicators are true indicators. But sometimes quantitative indicators cannot be replaced when it comes to GEP implementation, focusing on volumes, on percentage, as it is stated here. And when it's about impact, what it will be interesting is that those quantitative indicators help you to capture organizational change. It's not only just about measuring proportion, is measuring proportion as an evidence that change happened. There are some that are extremely important for building up accountability. We had a meeting earlier this week in Prague with the UNICEF project about tackling sexual harassment and gender-based violence in universities. And we know that for many reasons, you need quantitative indicators about the number of cases that have been treated, the type of institutional answer that have been given to them. First, because you will see whether your system of reporting is working or not. You will see whether it creates a trend of upward reporting, which is good because it shows it works, and maybe after downward, which is good because it shows it works also for prevention. But it's also important for creating accountability to share those indicators within limits of privacy and respect of both victims and alleged perpetrators with the community for showing what you are doing about that. But qualitative indicators are as much important as the first one, and they improve our understanding of what monitoring is about, because it's very important to assess how activities are being delivered in terms of their timing, within the schedule, past the schedule, in terms of their preparation, who is involved, is it a participatory process, is it not? In terms of stakeholders' engagement and involvement, and we know that in AGRIGEP it's a big question at this point of the project. You are all struggling to get your stakeholders actually support your work and take the appropriate decision and feel accountability for it. So all of that is hardly measured quantitatively, it's qualitative. It's also about people's experiences and perception. And that is a very important level to assess. The one of your team, you can feel gender fatigue, you know, you can feel demobilized because you are struggling, you are fighting 1 meals, and it becomes to be tiring. It's important to capture the experience of people that you engage, because maybe you do not engage them through the appropriate methods or channels, so they don't feel so much enthusiastic, but maybe they feel more enthusiastic with some channels than others, and maybe some profile of people, of stakeholders, are more ready to engage with you than others. All of that is important to measure, because then you can decide whom you will target actually, rather than just fighting windmills. Perception is important also to measure change, because part of the change is going through perception. A community might feel that something is changing, although the figures have not changed yet. You know, that's about the process. So you want to have like an increase by 50% of the proportion of women in decision-making position. You are not yet there, but most people in the institution report that they feel more encouraged to apply for senior position, that they feel that the competition is more open, that backdoor negotiation or private networks are not the only game in town. And this shows that there is like something happening. All of that is measured qualitatively, just as is attitudinal change, or at the opposite, organizational resistances to change. This is usually better captured through qualitative mean, especially when it comes to attitudinal change. You will hardly measure by figures, or inappropriately or inaccurately or incompletely measure through figures what has changed in people's mindset or in ways of doing things. You will observe it. You will see that interaction in selection committees are different, that precautions that are taken are different or increased, and that the result then measured through numbers is starting to change. The picture is improving in terms of representation of underrepresented gender. Then coming to some of the acronyms, you know what? As I said before, when you have many acronyms to help you think of what makes a good indicators, it just show it's not an easy process, okay? Because it means we needed to invent memorizing method to focus on what makes them good or not. SMART indicators is one of the most popular: specific, measurable, relevant, time-bound, and achievable. Specific, it corresponds to fitting a purpose. You are measuring things which are not too generic and which help you to answer a specific question about part of your GEP actions. Measurable, it has to be measured in a way or another, qualitatively or quantitatively, which means also that you have the resources technically to measure it. You may want to measure something, but you don't have the tools to do it. So set up the tools before measuring it. achievable is very important. It doesn't mean that you have to be under ambitious. We need ambition, but maybe ambitions can be distributed differently over the GEP life cycle, because we need to achieve a certain number of intermediate milestones so that we make a greater long-lasting impact. And achieving those milestones is not only good in terms of indicators towards the ultimate impact you expect, it's also good for self-motivation. You manage to do something in between. It might be modest, but it's opens for more change. So if you think in terms of achievability, it means that it should be related also to the timeline and to the different steps taken along your gender equality plan. Relevant, well, sounds again quite self-evident, but sometimes you want to measure everything, and this everything is not always relevant. You have maybe a different person with different interests in the room, which is good. That's a participatory process. We will get back to that later. But those people can have also different notions of what is to be changed and different personal interests. So some researcher might be super interested in knowing exactly the proportion of, I don't know, something very specific that is not so relevant to the overall process. So be careful of not investing your time and resources, which are necessarily limited, and your energy, which is usually even more limited because we are a human being, into measuring something which is not fully relevant. Time-bound, also self-evident, but when you will look back to your GEP, you will realize that perhaps it's not so much self-evident, because this is something which is not always connected to what you want to measure. There is a timeline for measuring things. You want to measure things qualitatively or quantitatively at a certain moment, not whenever. So it's important to relate an indicators to a timeline when this is to be collected, either once or several times in a regular manner, which has, of course, different implications. Any question about that? Sometimes you will find SMART with slightly, and that's the case for all acronyms. Sometimes you have small variation in one of the later that stands for another term, but generally speaking, it will it just want to tell the same. I spoke already a lot, 30 minutes, even slightly more. So do you have any question at this stage or observation? Is it clear enough? Okay. Another, and I won't go for a third one because there could be a third or fourth acronyms like CREAM and other and so on. Let's stay with the SMART and SPICED as in the announcement of the webinar. But because SPICED, it's a different take on the indicators that is very complementary to the SMART one. It's about the process of how you set them up. It refers to the properties of indicators that have been co-designed or co-developed with stakeholders in a participatory way. That's really important, and that's something that you can definitely do during the GEP. You can do that from now on. You can get back to your indicators in a more participatory way, knowing what you know now, and having on board the people you have on board at this stage. And probably it will make a difference in how you will inform them. Why? Because SPICE stands for subjective, participatory, interpreted and communicable, cross-checked, empowering, diverse and disaggregated. There are, in particular, I think two terms which are really important and related: participatory and empowering. The subjective aspect is also important because actually it means that you develop them with people who brings a particular expertise into the process. They have a standpoint. They know part of the organization. They are able to measure something, and they have an expertise to share with you. It makes them subjective, not only because they bring that expertise, but also because they participate in the process. So they feel ownership from the start on those indicators, or at least part of them, and they can better inform you about them. That's the subjective part. It's related to participation, because it's not only you having a broad view on what you would like to achieve with the GEP, it's a community participating in setting up a self-monitoring framework, something which is often lacking. The empowering part lies there, because there is participation, because people bring their own expertise, they feel greater ownership, and this greater ownership is empowering in itself. It gives you more information and insight about your own organization, not only about what you already know, but also about what the others know, because you share information with them. You have a better take and view about the evolution of your university, and that might be empowering also, because this better view, you can valorize it internally. You can come to your managers and say, okay, look, we have detected this or that. This is part of the empowerment process. So you can better reflect critically about what is happening. So it's not just like ticking boxes, which is super, super annoying, as we all know. It's not an Excel sheet. It becomes a process. Interpreted and communicable. That's the other side of the coin. If it's participatory and subjective, because it involves a lot of people with different expertise, it can come up with indicators which are completely unreadable to the others. You know, you are measuring something, there is a ton of acronyms. Oh, we would like to know about the actual proportion of PAC staff into the CAC department. Nobody knows what it's about in the next door faculty. You explain, you make them communicable. There is a technical part and there is a narrative about it, so that people know. That's also important. Cross-checked, because you will use different expertise, knowledge sources, or methods to inform your indicators, which will make them more robust. Let's be frank. It's difficult to match all the SMRT, SPICED at once. Probably you won't. But if you have this in mind and you match half of them, most likely your monitoring system will be already much better. So this is more a reference. But again, it shows that if someone took the time to invent those acronyms, it's because none of that is self-evident. And especially, I would say, in universities, which are collecting a lot of information, but not always in a meaningful or informed or coordinated way, to say the least. I see some eyes looking up. Lut, please.
Yeah, what I wanted to say is that this SPICED one directly comes from a sister project that preceded our project, AGRIGEP. It comes from Genovate, where the evaluators reflecting on the indicators and the targets of the GEP implementing partners proposed this acronym as guiding guidelines for improving the setting of their indicators. So it's one that does not come from any completely different context. It's directly from the institutional change context in universities and academia. And the subjective also relates to what Maxime said before, the qualitative indicators and the qualitative dimensions, in the sense that it calls on people's perceptions of the organization, how they experience differences in the organization in a more qualitative sense than directly pinpointable in numbers. That's just what I wanted to add. Sorry, Maxime, for interrupting.
No, it's very good, and also because it's a good also to refer to Genovate, because next slide will directly refer to the guidelines for GEP implementation. It was GEP, Gender Equality Action Plan implementation, that were developed by Genovate. They are very comprehensive, and they encapsulate a lot of the things that we are sharing with you this morning. So you will have the link in the presentation. I really strongly encourage you to get back to it. What was interesting in the Genovate project also is that it was involving a lot of people with experience of actually evaluation, policy evaluation. So to summarize what we should take from those acronyms, and generally speaking, the conversation that has been unfolding in part of sister project also regarding evaluating gender equality plans, that both quantitative and qualitative indicators are necessary. Quantitative is not a lower quality type of indicators. It's responding to different questions or informing the same answer from a different angle, and you need them. It's not just like, oh, I don't want to put figures because I don't want to take risk and risk failure. No, it's that you actually need them as well. Using participatory method for developing indicators, I think we will agree with Lut and Pam that it's important in many ways, not only because it gives you more and it empowers you more, it makes you part of the process, it gives you an opportunity to engage with stakeholders, and we know in AGRIGEP it's one of the big questions, and you do it from the side of their expertise, which can be sectorial and specific, and it's easier to get people on that than discussing gender bias in academia in general. They might help you to measure things better, but it's also important because we have just a fraction of the knowledge about our own organization. If I refer to Mate, for instance, you might well know what is going on in your campus, in your faculty, but not what is going on another campus of Mate, because it was another organization that was merged with yours, and they have a different way of doing things, and you have absolutely no clue, and it's absolutely standard situation to encounter this. So participation means also that you bring this knowledge from this different segment of your organization. Strategically choose your indicators. And especially ask yourself whether it's nice to know something or you need it. Do you need really to know about this? Or is it something that you would like to know because it would be super interesting? These are different things. It might be super interesting, but it might not help to monitor actually how change is being delivered. So be strategic, narrow down the scope, limit some particularly quantitative indicators to the most important ones, and make them time-bound rather than covering everything for the sake of universal interest. Try to build indicators which are relatively easy or not too costly to collect. Easy doesn't mean that the indicator itself is weak or less interesting. It just means that you have the tools to collect it. Costly mean that some things can be very hard to measure and will necessitate a lot of units to collaborate with each other, and the long process. You might not prioritize this because it might fail or it might be difficult to set up. And strive to institutionalize your indicators and data collection system, because imagine that as part of the project, you manage to create a framework to collect important information that actually and efficiently inform your gender equality plan monitoring. But you fail to institutionalize them. So during the next GEP, this framework won't be in place anymore. And there is a cumulative effect here. The more you consolidate your data collection system, the more it's like rhizoma, you know, it's connecting to each other. I have the system for collecting this and progressively connect to another system of data collection in another part of the campus or in another unit of the university. And it's important that these rhizomes can actually prosper and further grow into a fully proficient data collection system. This said, let's move to the second stage, which is to relate this indicators framing to a broader evaluation process. And I will get back notably to sources from Genovate and authors like Espinosa and Bustalò and Velasco involved in the project. An indicator should be related somehow to an evaluation question. And evaluation questions can be developed at the level of the whole GEP and at the level of each part and possibly action of a gender equality plan, or areas of action at least. If we look at generic evaluation question that encompass a lot of processes and information, they should at least be distinguished in terms of phase of the GEP. Is it about the design of the GEP, this one and the next? Is it about its implementation? Is it about its result or expected result? So when it comes to design, to what extent does the GEP include specific actions related to the areas and dimensions of gender change? Typically, the one recommended by Horizon Europe, because we are in a EU-funded project. And already asking this question and looking at your own gender equality plan, you will understand that you do not cover those areas of action to the same extent. That some aspects like gender-based violence or the gender dimension in research are less covered than decision-making access or work-life balance measures, for instance. So that's a big question, but it already yields some crucial information. When it comes to implementation, to what extent are GEP processes, coordination, management, communication, knowledge transfer-wise, facilitating gender change in those specific areas that you are covering? Is it doing the same, producing the same effect in all of those areas? Or maybe there is not enough stakeholder participation or not enough capacity building, which limits the benefit of those GEP actions for the institution. And in terms of result, to what extent is the GEP contributing to gender change? How change happen, which is when it is about like mostly outcome and impact indicators, and especially impact indicators. So indicators help you to respond to this type of question. Here, very generic, but then you can make them more specific for each action. What also Genovate wrote is a reflection about the different, not only areas of change, but also dimensions of change. And this is no longer about the area of action of your gender equality plan. It's about the area of change in general. Change goes through ideas. There is a change in ideas. It goes through structure and mechanism. And it goes through people who make the change happen. So you have for each of those areas different dimensions that can be considered. If you look to the people part, the expertise they bring, the incentives and opportunities you give to them for participating in the process of change, and their attitudes, how they help changing attitudes, how their attitudes are changing themselves. So you see, this is much more sophisticated than just measuring how many people participated in a training session. It's really about capturing all what is helping you to change institution. Task and responsibilities, attribution, capacity to make decision, to help the change process, and to cooperate and learn from each other as we try to do now. All of that is important also to monitor. And finally, the Genovate guidelines also show us that not only the GEP itself, the GEP design itself is a process. The design of indicators is a process too within the process. This is the petal of the flower you see on the left of the screen. The delimitation here is referring to the project of monitoring your GEP. It emphasizes stakeholder engagement, participation, remember the SPICE indicators. It invites you to develop first question before finding the right indicators to enter them. It invites you also to create a strategy to collect the data, because you might like invent indicators without the data collection system, so it is worthless. And it invites you also to not only collect, but analyze them, so that you can communicate about what is happening and improving not only the indicators themselves, but also the data collection system.